Welcome to week 2 wide receiver rankings. As you can see, it is a solo episode. Hayden is dealing with a family event. So if you could send some positive thoughts to his loved ones, that would be tremendous. It's going to be a shorter episode here today, but we're going to still critique Hayden's rankings. He can't get out of that, that's for sure. Let's kick things off with the top tier. This week, Ja'Marr Chase, Cincinnati Bengals, bounce back spot against the Jacksonville Jaguars as the wide receiver 1. 17 fantasy points in the pick'em lobby right now. We know that last week, Cincinnati just had 7 yards of offense in the second half. 7 yards of offense for this Bengals offense. Jaguars don't have Myles Garrett rushing the passer. They do have Trayvon Walker, Josh Hines-Allen, but as we know, slow starts are kind of a customary thing here for the Bengals offense. Sometimes they get it going in week 2, week 3. We're hoping for it immediately here in the second game of the season. Did want to mention, no Xavier Worthy, no Juwan Jennings in these rankings. We know both are dealing with, at least in Xavier Worthy's case, a very significant injury. Somehow, some way, they are on the practice field, kind of, not going through full workouts. But if you want to tune into our Sunday morning start sit show, we will definitely have updates on all of them. And for now, I would just keep them out of your starting lineup. Wide receiver 2 this week, CeeDee Lamb, New York Giants, an 83.5 total yardage projection over in the underdog pick'em lobby. Per tracking, Giants utilized new free agent Paulson Adebo as a shadow corner for Terry McLaurin in week 1. I do wonder if they will do the same exact thing here with CeeDee Lamb. We know, though, that Terry McLaurin doesn't move inside and outside in terms of their frequency as CeeDee Lamb does. Don't focus in on the 3 or 4 drops that CeeDee Lamb had last week. He could be simply fantastic for you in week 2. Puka Nacua, wide receiver 3 at the Tennessee Titans. I wouldn't be shocked if someone ranks him as the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. He was that damn good in week 1 and nearly 14 projected points for the second game of the season. 10 of 11 targets he caught last week for 130 yards against the Houston Texans. He led the NFL in target per route run back in 2024. And yes, just right back at it in 2025. And without Cooper Kupp, this is notable. Sean McVay played Puka Nacua in week 1 at a career high 53% of his snaps from the slot this past week. That's where he caught 7 of those passes for 83 yards. Let that usage continue. Wide receiver 4, Malik Nabers at the Dallas Cowboys. Andrew Thomas, again, according to Dan Dugan, the beat writer, sounds very unlikely to play in this game. I always, have a conversation with Hayden when that is the case, because last season, Malik Nabers' ceiling was basically capped when the left tackle play was abysmal. Not to spoil it, but on Saturday, we're going to have quarterback and tight end rankings for you to watch. And Russell Wilson is dead last in that. So to me, it can kind of be difficult to have the wide receiver 4 on the week with the lowest rated quarterback. But at the same time, we know of Malik Nabers, who was very high in fantasy usage in week 1. He can get there just by 1 or 2 long receptions or just creating on his own on top of that. He did move into the slot for about 39% of his snaps, which would be the highest rate he's had in a game so far in his career. Ladd McConkey is wide receiver 5 against the Las Vegas Raiders. He's actually wide receiver 10 in consensus rankings. So we'll call this an onion hanger here for Hayden in week 2. 74.5 receiving yards in the pick'em lobby right now is what Ladd McConkey's projected at. Top 10 in neutral pass rate in week 1. It's basically been that way since Ladd McConkey took a massive jump during his rookie season. And against this cornerback group for the Raiders, they did a great job against run defense last week for New England. But Ladd could definitely have his way both as an outside and inside pass catcher. Drake London is here as wide receiver 6 at the Minnesota Vikings and is actually going against the wide receiver 7. That is Justin Jefferson on the opposite end against the Falcons. First with Drake London. He's also dealing with a shoulder injury. He didn't play the final series this past week, but even despite that, trying to tie the game on the field goal, 15 targets in week 1. That means it's 46 targets over his past 3 games with Michael Penix under center. Just ridiculous volume. Again, hope the shoulder is okay. The major difference with the Falcons in week 1 compared to last season, and this can just be a small sample, but 6.6 air yards per target in week 1 versus a 12.7 air yards per target a year ago in that tiny 2 or 3 game stretch. So we'll see what happens if that kind of evens out in week 2. Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 7, 24 pass routes last week. 24 pass routes. To this point, as Rich Rebar in his worksheet pointed out, Justin Jefferson has averaged 37 routes per game. So hopefully, again, talking about averages, that gets to about 30. But at the same time, that's exactly what Hayden and I discussed all summer long about the Vikings being more of a balanced offense with their interior offensive line and running back additions. So again, maybe that's 7, 8 routes per game that Jefferson won't see this year as he has in previous years. For someone that was drafted as the wide receiver 2 or 3 in your league, that's why he sits here as wide receiver 7, and maybe he moves up or even down in future weeks on top of that. Nico Collins closes out this top tier as wide receiver 8 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All summer long, this team had to write on napkins, whiteboards in the office, to funnel targets in the direction of their best, by far, offensive skill position player. And all Nico Collins could get was 3 catches for 25 yards. That's just not good enough from Nick Caley, someone who I was really excited about heading into year 1 as a play caller. And he was even going against a team that he had just worked for in the LA Rams. On top of this, we know that Texans offensive line dealt with some injuries and they're not good. And Todd Bowles is going to bring the blitz. He's going to disguise some looks. So hopefully Nico Collins can get on track and the season really starts for him in week 2. All right, let's drop down to tier 2. That is T. Higgins here as wide receiver 9. He's actually wide receiver 14 in consensus rankings. So a bit of a bump here for Hayden. This is against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Joe Burrow last week targeted his wide receivers at just 39% of the time. That is the lowest rate for him in a game during his NFL career. We talked about with Chase at the top. This projects immediately back down to T. Higgins on top of it. And again, don't be surprised if the Cincinnati Bengals offense looks wildly different in week 2 versus week 1. They tried to prevent this in preseason. They played these guys more than ever before in preseason action. And yet the Bengals gonna bingle. But at some point we know that means, maybe wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 3 overall weeks for this duo in our future. Brian Thomas Jr. is actually the wide receiver 10 here against those Bengals. Liam Cohen, I believe, just my thoughts, is smart enough to know that 2 touches is not good enough for Brian Thomas Jr. to exit a game with. 1 catch, 1 carry that equaled a touchdown last week. Now, it wasn't the play caller's fault. He got 7 targets last week, just errant passes on top of it. But this defense is just as easy of a matchup as the one that they got last week against the Carolina Panthers. And I would argue even worse cornerbacks on top of it. So BTJ could easily make his mark as a top 10 wide receiver this week. That brings us to Zay Flowers as wide receiver 7 against the Cleveland Browns, a 58.5 receiving yards total in the pick'em lobby right now. Seems kind of low to me. I mean, Isaiah Likely might be coming back in this game, but he's coming off a multi-week injury that forced him out of the entire preseason. Patrick Ricard is going to be out as well. The reason I bring that up is because we know with Todd Monken, this offense loves to use multiple personnel groupings in terms of 12, 22, 13 personnel, basically heavy sets constantly. And that would only keep 2 wide receivers on the field. They ran 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver set at a higher rate than they have in a very long time. And that just allowed Zay Flowers to not only work like the canyon of space over the middle of the field, but they finally connected on like these downfield vertical patterns. And that was the key to really unlocking a true ceiling from Zay Flowers being like the wide receiver 20 in projections to being about the wide receiver 11 in projections right now. Brings us to Amon-Ra St. Brown as the wide receiver 12. This is against the Chicago Bears. Big question is if Jalen Johnson is going to play. He did not in that opener against the Minnesota Vikings. I also want to say, speaking of defense, what we have seen last week from the Green Bay Packers against this Lions offense, and then what we saw on Thursday Night Football with the Green Bay Packers against the Washington Commanders, makes me feel a little bit better about what this Lions offense can be in 2025. Like Johnny Morton didn't come in and light the world on fire. Jared Goff averaged a league low, I want to stress that, 4.2 air yards per attempt in week 1. So the run defense from the Chicago Bears probably won't be as good. The pass rush certainly won't be as good as Micah Parsons and Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness and all those guys. So let's get back on track here with the Lions, and they could totally make us forget how bad it was in week 1. Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 13 against the Buffalo Bills. I'm still going to attach the volatile name here for the Jets offense and specifically their passing attack, even if Hayden has him in must-start territory. Again, I want to stress that last week, Zay Flowers against this very same Buffalo Bills defense went for 7 catches, 143 yards, and 1 score. And the other part of this is if the Jets get behind, which they are projected to, the Bills are, I believe, projected for the second most points in the league this week, then the Jets should be forced to pass a bit more often. But last week, to me, one reason why both the rushing and the passing game was so on point was because it was kind of all in phase. It had a great rhythm to it. They weren't being pressed or pushed to pass constantly. And so, the passing attack would be quite different if it's just, hey, let's line everyone up, 4-minute drill at all times. So, but at the same time, we know that Garrett Wilson's going to get the vast majority of those targets, and you can't knock how it looked in week 1, that's for sure. Davante Adams, wide receiver 14 at the Tennessee Titans, played 75% of his snaps on the outside in his debut with the Rams in week 1. Would have loved to see even more slot snaps. But at the same time, this Titans secondary can be picked apart on the outside. The J.R. Sneed is like in and out of the lineup and all this type of stuff. So if Matthew Stafford plays just as well as he did last week, there's a very good chance, not going up against this Texans defense, instead it's the Titans defense, that the Rams could have 2 top 14, top 15 scores at the position this week. Courtland Sutton, wide receiver 15 at the Indianapolis Colts. So many corner injuries on the Colts roster at this moment. And Courtland Sutton was the only good part of the passing game last week for the Broncos. Marvin Mims, very little. Troy Franklin, very little. Courtland Sutton, just like Jakobi Meyers, who we'll talk about here in a moment, is like the most vanilla great pick in fantasy football on a weekly basis. So while Lou Anarumo did a great job last week against the Miami Dolphins passing attack, I don't know if he's going to be able to outsmart the Sean Payton, Bo Nix dynamic as well as he did Miami and Tua and McDaniel last week. Jaxon Smith-Njigba closes out tier 2 against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. 9 of 13 targets he caught for 124 yards, and that was of 150 total passing yards for the Seahawks. He was and still is wide receiver 20 in consensus rankings this week. I just don't get it. Like, Clint Kubiak knows where the passing game is and who it needs to be funneled through. I would expect the rushing attack, as we talked about in the running back ranking show, to improve against this Pittsburgh Steelers defense. This secondary is also dealing with injuries. Joey Porter Jr. might miss this contest. So look, JSN is just a perfect fit in terms of being an inside to outside / tight split wide receiver. So I'm expecting JSN to continue, just like he was last week, as a top 5, top 7 producer at the position, to be even closer, I think, to a top 10 producer this week. Speaking of, Jakobi Meyers, wide receiver 17 against the Los Angeles Chargers, another onion hanger from Hayden Winks in his rankings, wide receiver 26 in consensus ranks. People were just late to this, man. Jacoby's really good. And on top of this, Brock Bowers' status is totally up in the air. We don't know if it's a knee knock or a PCL injury. They're being very vague about it. And if they can't run like they couldn't last week against the New England Patriots, and that might be even more difficult against the Chargers, they're just going to flat out stop running and throw the football. Throw it all over the yard with Geno Smith. And last week, Jakobi Meyers, 8 of 10 targets for 97 yards in week 1, and he counted for 30% of the team's targets. He should be locked in to your wide receiver 2, and at the very worst, flex spot in your leagues. Tetairoa McMillan, wide receiver 18 at the Arizona Cardinals. The only good thing about the Panthers passing attack last week was actually, it was really fun from Bryce Young to T-Mac. 5 of 9 targets for 68 yards. Could have easily been 30 more yards with a pass interference that I actually think he caught, and then a near touchdown on 4th down that T-Mac got one hand on but couldn't get both hands on. This Cardinals defense is a lot of fun. They move around quite a bit, but let's not forget that the Panthers put actually 36 points on this very same unit last season. The Cardinals played single high at about 36% of the time in week 1. And when Bryce saw T-Mac in, single coverage on the outside, they just were in sync on those outside throws, either vertical routes or sideline routes or back shoulders and all that type of stuff. So hopefully that continues. A.J. Brown already down at wide receiver 19. He's actually wide receiver 13 in consensus ranking. So this one is flipped for Mr. Winks. And this comes on the heels of 1 catch for 8 yards. Again, the underlying metrics, he was out there for 97% of dropbacks, as we talked about in Stats versus Film and on the Sunday night show. The Cowboys just played zone coverage constantly. 4 short passes. It wasn't man-to-man situations at all that didn't allow, Jalen Hurts to throw the football down the field at all. And we know A.J. Brown's yards per route run versus man coverage, he goes absolutely nuclear. And against the Chiefs, though, it has been kind of high variance for him. His last 3 games against a Steve Spagnuolo defense, 6 for 96 and 1 catch for 8 yards. Again, hopefully that doesn't happen again. And then 3 catches for 43 and a score. But if Dallas Goedert misses this game, which I don't think he was seen at practice on Friday, to me, that means even more passes are going to be funneled in the direction of A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. So I'm more optimistic than Hayden is on A.J. Brown this week. Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 20 against the New England Patriots. We just have to ask ourselves, is this a wide receiver issue for Tyreek Hill, or is it a quarterback issue? And I think the vast majority of people are just going to say it's a quarterback issue, because when you go back and watch Tyreek, for the most part, he still looks fast. He still looks like he's creating separation, and he's still getting open. Unfortunately, because it was such a blowout, he only ran 5 routes in the fourth quarter in week 1 due to backups being placed on the field. So we didn't even get like garbage time opportunities for this team. Hopefully that changes this week against the New England Patriots, who are going to be without both Keon White, pass rusher, and Christian Gonzalez, their best corner, in week 2. Marvin Harrison Jr. sits here as wide receiver 21 against the Carolina Panthers. Again, Hayden Winks is ranking him later than consensus rankings, who have him as wide receiver 15. In this matchup last year, Marv really got roughed up. He just simply was not winning his tight window targets. Wasn't strong enough, to be perfectly honest with you. We did see him strong enough in week 1 to win one of those vertical sideline tight window target routes. So if that continues, that would be fantastic. And the Panthers played cover 3 on a league high 60% of plays in week 1. So if that's the case, and if Marv continues to get, these single looks on the outside, and if he makes good on them this year versus last year, then immediately he'll jump about 12 to 16 spots in comparison to where he finished last season. Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. Again, I ask you this question. Have you ever sat down just for a couple of minutes and Googled your legal name? You'll be stunned at how much information is out there about yourself, where you've worked, where you lived, where you went to school, all this type of stuff. What you had for lunch yesterday is probably up there somehow. I mean, do you even know what data brokers can do? Like, they can get your name, your contact info, your social security number, home addresses, even information about your family members. It could all be compiled by data brokers and sold online. So what you need to do is take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting Underdog to 64000. The only way to get 20% off is to text Underdog to 64000. That's Underdog to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. Ricky Pearsall as wide receiver 22 at the New Orleans Saints. Mac Jones is his quarterback this week, if you've been living under a rock. We'll see what happens. I mean, Mac Jones last year, we know that he was the one that got Brian Thomas Jr. so much production. And at the same time, it's kind of cool to be on this end of the narrative where we had the Mac Jones versus Trey Lance discourse when Mac was coming into the NFL. So we'll see what Kyle Shanahan uncorks here with Mac. But Ricky Pearsall was clearly this team's wide receiver 1 in week 1, 2 end zone targets, shot plays, design red zone plays on top of it. And it's him and CMC who are healthy. That's it. So Ricky shouldn't exit with anything less than, I would say, 8 targets here at the New Orleans Saints, maybe 7 targets, even though last week that was a lower number and he only caught, I believe, 4 passes, but they were true downfield stuff. Hollywood Brown, Marquise, 23rd wide receiver here against the Philadelphia Eagles. He's actually wide receiver 29 in consensus rankings. Look, I don't think he's going to get 16 targets every single week, but 16 targets is crazy. And it's not something you can simply ignore, right? My question here, though, is Quinyon Mitchell is going to line up against the best wide receiver on the opponent's team when they line up outside. And then Cooper DeJean will do the same thing against slot wide receivers. There is only basically one wide receiver on the Chiefs right now if Xavier Worthy doesn't play, and that is Hollywood Brown. So we could get like real lockdown stuff against Hollywood Brown versus, we know when we watched that game with the Cowboys offense, it was CeeDee Lamb versus Adoree Jackson over and over again. And that's why all the production was being funneled there versus George Pickens. So do wonder if just Vic Fangio preventing big plays down the field and also placing his best corners on Hollywood Brown, what's the counterpunch going to be for this Chiefs offense? And it sucks we're already talking about counterpunches here for the Chiefs offense in week 2. Keenan Allen, the old man himself, as wide receiver 24 at the Las Vegas Raiders. Another onion hanger. I'm going to use that phrase a lot today. Wide receiver 38 in consensus rankings. That's just too damn late, man. This is an offense that passes the football at like a top 10 rate in the NFL. At this point, people haven't adjusted to that just yet. And Keenan Allen is out there like 80% of the time. He plays outside, he plays inside, just a great balance to what Ladd McConkey brings to the table. So he's so good at finding soft spots in zone, little slivers of space, using that experience on top of it. So Keenan Allen almost certainly should be in your starting lineups here in week 2. Mike Evans as wide receiver 25 against the Houston Texans. This might be a difficult run for the Bucs offense for a couple reasons. One, we know Houston has a great corner in Derek Stingley and actually multiple really good defensive backs. And it's the pass rush. Like the Bucs pass protectors, I should say, last week against the Falcons did not do a good job. And now you're going from that, which is a bunch of young guys and kind of journeymen, to what the Texans bring to the table, which is Donnell Hunter, Will Anderson, and a whole bunch of other dudes. So we're going to see if Baker's magic works for another week here. But at the very least, we know there are only 2 wide receivers on this team, and Mike Evans and actually his running mate in Emeka Egbuka, who is also wide receiver 26 here. People are frustrated by Matthew Golden, which I understand, playing about 60 or 50% of the snaps. Other rookie wide receivers not getting run. That's not the case here for Emeka Egbuka. Played 97% of passing plays, the highest rate of any rookie in week 1, and 55% of those snaps were out wide, 44% in the slot. So already getting really nice balance there. Chris Olave, wide receiver 27, San Francisco 49ers. Olave, speaking of, played about 41% of his snaps in the slot, where he was targeted on 37% of his routes. That's big. We always talk about Kellen Moore. We did it with the Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb. We did it with the Chargers and Keenan Allen. We did it with DeVonta Smith in Philadelphia. And now it seems like Chris Olave is the player that Kellen Moore is moving around this Saints offense. Now you go from those 3 quarterbacks to Spencer Rattler, who wasn't the worst in the league, but it's definitely a step down. But Olave has played 2 full games with Spencer Rattler so far, and he's gotten 14 and 13 targets in those games. I know I was drafting a ton of Chris Olave. I'm sure if you tuned in the channel all summer, you were doing the exact same thing. It might be difficult to get massive spike weeks just because of this offense, and scoring points might be difficult, but the plays are there and the volume seems to be there. And at some point, that's all we can count on. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 28 against the Los Angeles Rams. Ridley was at 8.6 yards per target in week 1. 62% of his targets were within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. We know that's very different than what he was doing with Will Levis last year, where he averaged 15.7 air yards per target, with 34% of his targets within 10 yards downfield. So you would like to think that closer to the line of scrimmage means more gimmies and easier receptions. But in order for that to happen, Calvin Ridley actually has to catch the ball. That's one layer to this. George Pickens, wide receiver 29 against the G-Man New York Giants. Yeah, look, we talked about it. Vic Fangio, week 1, Thursday Night Football. I know everyone got upset when, CeeDee Lamb getting all these targets, George Pickens didn't. Well, again, that's Quinyon Mitchell. And Vic Fangio and the team, as we talked about in this very wide receiver episode last week, just do not allow shot plays and downfield reps. That can be very different against this Giants defense. Again, we're going to see maybe their second corner against George Pickens, and we're going to see them have to defend these deep downfield shots. So I would expect at least one of those to hit here in week 2. This might surprise you, but Travis Hunter sits here as wide receiver 30. I'm very interested to see, and I know Liam Cohen already said this in a press conference, how much corner Travis Hunter plays. He said he's going to play more, but how much is more? Like when they face teams with 2 studs at wide receivers like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, does that mean Travis Hunter, I don't think he's just going to flip to, being more of a cornerback than wide receiver. Does that mean it goes up to, 15 snaps, 20 snaps versus I think it was 6 last week? And at the same time, does those 15 or 20 take away from the snaps that he's going to play on offense? To me, he's kind of locked in to what he's doing on offense and the choice routes and the inside breaking routes. And we nearly got a vertical route on top of that, some of the screens too. So we get some really nice gimmies every single week for Travis Hunter. And again, this is a defense we definitely want to attack against the Cincinnati Bengals. DeVonta Smith is wide receiver 31. This is at the Kansas City Chiefs. Last 3 games against this Chiefs defense. I said it for AJ Brown. Hold on to your butts. It's really good for Davante, the Slim Reaper. 7 for 100 on 9 targets, 6 for 99 on 8 targets, and then 4 catches for 69 yards and a score on 5 targets. A lot of the same players, same defensive coordinator, and DeVonta Smith, albeit now with a new OC in Philadelphia, has a track record that certainly is fantastic against this Chiefs defense. DJ Moore to close out tier 4 against the Detroit Lions. We know he saw fewer targets than both Odunze and Olamide Zaccheaus. He did see 3 carries for 8 yards in the opener. Some Deebo Samuel-esque usage, I guess we could say, for DJ Moore. I don't know, man. Like the body language still isn't there for me. I know when he went out after that hard hit, then that's when Odunze caught the pass for a touchdown in the low red zone. We'll see. I don't know if I agree with him being number 1 here on this list, but Hayden definitely back-to-back weeks has DJ Moore as the Bears wide receiver 1, but does have Odunze right next to him as wide receiver 33. Again, this is the Lions defense. The connective tissue between these teams is massive. It's not just the play caller, but it's the wide receiver coach and Antoine Randall came over from Detroit over to Chicago. So I'm sure this team wants to do really well. Every team does, but there's going to be some headlines written about the loser of this game because that squad is going to be 0-2 heading into week 3. Quentin Johnston, QJ himself, wide receiver 34 at the Las Vegas Raiders, a whopping 42.5 receiving yards in the underdog pick'em lobby. Again, that is 3 Chargers wide receivers ranked inside of the top 34 here. That's nuts. That also speaks to, though, again, I'm not going to say it's a pass first unit, but they are so much more balanced than they used to be. And yeah, the underlying metrics will call them pass first. We will see. Look, QJ, get him on runway routes, just these scissor concepts or big crossers over the field. And then we know inside the red zone, he actually is just going to flat out target Ladd McConkey in that area. So maybe a bunch of Brazilians think he's the best wide receiver in the league after that debut. Keon Coleman, wide receiver 35 at the New York Jets. Keon Coleman, I would say arguably his best game as a professional. Maybe that's not arguable. He does give, Gabe Davis vibes, high variance, big plays, broken plays on top of that. We always remember Gabe Davis having a tremendous week, and then you get really excited, and then it's let down either the next game or the game after that. And especially when you look at Keon Coleman, 1 reception for 17 yards through 3 quarters of action in that week 1 opener. And they are heavily favored against the Jets, which is very different than that Ravens contest last week where they really had to push the pedal, especially in the 4th quarter. And that's when he caught 7 of 8 targets for 95 yards and the touchdown. All right. I'm sure a lot of you have been asking, this is where DK Metcalf is, all the way down as wide receiver 36. He's actually wide receiver 18 in consensus rankings. So Hayden has major reservations of DK this week. He is projected for 12.5 fantasy points in the pick'em lobby. Look, this is a revenge game, massive spot for DK against his old team in Seattle. A Seattle defense that is exceptional, has great defensive backs, has a really nice pass rush. The Steelers offense looked really great. They married what Aaron Rodgers does well, and he really bought into an Arthur Smith offense in terms of under center stuff and definitely moving him off his spot. There was a lot of movement there. So we'll see if that can continue. He was flicking his wrist and throwing some nice early shots down the field. I wasn't as impressed with DK Metcalf when going back and watching. I'm not going to say some of his catches were fluky, but he did catch one on the ground after it deflected off a defender. Let's put it that way. Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 37 at the Baltimore Ravens. Joe Flacco ended up throwing just 4.4% of his passes 20 or more yards downfield in week 1. That was 29th across the league. And he targeted his wide receivers on just 43% of his throws, which was 27th in the league. Again, that's why, Harold Fannin was getting hype this week. Dylan Sampson was getting hype this week. So if Joe Flacco is going to side there in checkdowns and especially design plays, we know that they go to the tight ends a lot versus, what Jameis Winston was doing with pure wide receiver stuff. And that's when Jerry Jeudy blasted off last year. And that would be a problem for Jeudy moving forward. Plus, Cedric Tillman flat out outplayed Jerry Jeudy, arguably, last week. And this is the Baltimore Ravens defense we're talking about. And that's in comparison to the Cincinnati Bengals defense last week. All right, I'm just going to throw the rest of the wide receivers on the board. I talked about Cedric Tillman. He's next here as wide receiver 38. Rashid Shaheed is wide receiver 39. As with Olave, again, Kellen Moore was near the top in pace, near the top in plays already, and he's carried that in every single stop so far. So we don't believe that was just a one-week trend here for the Saints. And then Michael Pittman is the first Colts wide receiver to discuss here. Lots of RPOs last week for Daniel Jones, and they didn't have to push the pedal for 4 quarters. That's for sure. So those are going to go to Tyler Warren, and those are going to go to Michael Pittman. And, this team was running multiple tight end sets too. So 2 wide receiver sets. Pittman is going to be on the field. Jalen Waddle is wide receiver 41. He's gotten cleared from the shoulder issue, I believe, that he had. This is against the New England Patriots. Look, maybe the Dolphins week 1 in a dome, when they're usually great, was just a down week. It didn't look like that on tape, but now they're at home against this New England Patriots team without their best corner. So again, this is a spot that you would say, hey, I drafted this guy. I have other injuries. I guess I'll play him. And if it works out, the process was there just from a game environment standpoint. Then close out with Khalil Shakir and then Jameson Williams. Again, this is Jameson Williams against the Chicago Bears. Hayden has been quite down on Jameson Williams. I was drafting him much higher than Hayden was. And, the biggest difference was, as we keep talking about this Lions team, they're projected for 33 points last season. That is what they had in every game. Week 1, that was down at 22. Right now for week 2, that's at 26.5, which is, half a touchdown more than it was last week. So we'll see what happens. Like, I am not totally selling this Lions squad like many people are, again, because this Packers team and especially their defense might just be the most legit unit in the NFL across the league. So Jameson, while, getting 5 catches might be difficult for him every single week, especially when Ben Johnson isn't calling plays. The season is not over. The season is not over. So we'll see what they bring against Chicago Bears. All right, that does it. I know that was long-winded. It was just one person. Thanks for sticking with me. Tomorrow on the channel, Saturday, quarterback and tight end rankings as well. So hit that subscribe button, leave a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you in the next one. See ya.